A few years ago, I had a job in a hotel where I worked in room service. One night, I had to work the overnight shift, which was not too difficult because people usually didn't order food very often during that time. At around 4 a.m., I received an order for chicken parmesan, which was a popular item on our limited late-night menu. After the cook prepared the meal, I gathered all the items on a tray and took the elevator up to the 14th floor, which was the top floor of the hotel. I walked down the hallway to the designated room and knocked on the door, saying room service, and once the guest opened the door, I would place the tray on the table and give them a bill to sign. One of the reasons I enjoyed working in room service was because of the good tips I received. I always made sure to deliver the food earlier than the estimated time given to the guests, and I tried to be polite without talking too much since most people simply wanted their food quickly. When I knocked on the door and waited for someone to answer, I heard sounds coming from the other side. Usually, it's normal to hear people moving around, like getting up from the bed or couch, or even turning down the TV volume before coming to the door. But this time, the noise was different. I can't really explain why, but it just didn't sound like the usual movement you'd hear in a regular hotel room. It was like there was more activity than what you'd expect for a normal-sized room. I couldn't figure out what they might be doing. Finally, the door opened, and there stood an ordinary-looking man. I guessed he was a businessman since they were the usual guests at our hotel. I noticed that he appeared very tired or exhausted, but I assumed it was because it was already 4 in the morning. After placing the tray down, I heard the door close, which wasn't strange because hotel doors automatically close if you don't hold them open. However, something odd happened when I heard the lock being set. I turned around to give the man the bill to sign, trying my best to act normal, even though I was starting to feel nervous. He seemed unusually cheerful for this late hour and began asking me a lot of personal questions. He wanted to know my age and if I grew up in the area, specifically which city. I replied that I was 19 years old and that I was from around here, without giving away too much information, because it made me uncomfortable sharing such details with him. I started feeling really scared and uneasy. I think he noticed because he came closer while signing the check, then in the most disgusting way, he looked at me from head to toe. It made me feel violated and uncomfortable. Just as he made eye contact, he suddenly lunged at me and tried to grab me. I quickly moved to the side and jumped onto the bed for safety. From there, I quickly jumped off the bed and rushed towards the door. I managed to open it, but he grabbed my arm before I could escape. I screamed as loudly as possible, hoping someone else on the floor would wake up. Since he didn't want to get caught, he let go of me. As soon as he did, I ran down the hallway towards the employee elevator and immediately locked the door behind me for safety. My heart was racing, and I couldn't believe what had just happened while I was working in room service. You always encounter some creepy people, and I often imagine the bad things that could occur when delivering food, but I never thought it would actually come true. When I reached the lobby, I immediately informed the night manager about the incident, and he assured me that he would call the police and report what had happened. I stayed in the lobby until the police arrived, and I provided them with all the details during my statement. However, when they went up to the room, the man was nowhere to be found. There was no evidence that someone had been there, except for the untouched plate of food. The name on the reservation didn't match any real person when they checked the system, and the room had been paid for in cash, so there was no credit card information available. I felt really disappointed and hopeless when I learned that the police couldn't do much more than keeping an eye out for a tall man with dark hair and pale blue, almost gray eyes. It was the best description I could provide since he didn't have any distinctive features. This man was out there somewhere, and it made me feel uneasy. I decided to go home because I was so shaken up that I couldn't continue with my shift. I became even more paranoid when I realized that I had mentioned to the man that I lived in the area. I worried that he might be watching me as I left the hotel and drove home. Since it was late, there weren't many people on the roads, so I couldn't be sure if I was being followed or not. Throughout the entire drive home, my heart was pounding, and I constantly looked around, expecting to see him somewhere. I rushed inside my home as fast as I could, hoping to find some comfort and distract myself from dwelling on all the possible scary scenarios that could have unfolded if I hadn't escaped in time. I turned on the TV, hoping it would help take my mind off those thoughts. However, the incident had affected me so deeply that I had to quit my job. I felt extremely paranoid and couldn't bear the idea of something similar happening again. This incident has made it difficult for me to consider working at a hotel ever again. A few years ago, I had a job at a gas station. It was in a small town about 2 hours north of my hometown. I was living there temporarily while I fixed up the house I owned. During the day, I worked on the house, and at night, I worked at the gas station to help pay for it. The gas station was located near a big road where many people would pass through town. One night, I had a shift from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. I didn't mind working these hours because it wasn't very busy, and I always found things to keep myself occupied. Most of the time, I was the only one working for a big part of the shift. On that particular night, there were quite a few people coming through during the first few hours. However, around 1 a.m., things started to get quieter. After finishing mopping the floors, I returned to the area behind the counter. That's when I noticed a car entering the gas station. It was a regular black car that seemed normal, except when it got closer, I realized it had no license plates. The car drove slowly around the front and eventually went out of my sight as it reached the side of the building. About 5 minutes later, a man walked into the gas station, presumably the driver of the car. He was a very tall man, around 6.5 feet tall, and quite thin. He was wearing a black sweater and gray pants. His face had a serious expression as he entered through the front door and looked directly at me. The counter was far away from where he entered, so he was probably around 40 feet away from me. He didn't say anything and simply stared at me. It felt really awkward, so I decided to break the silence and greeted him with a hello and a wave. He didn't respond and instead walked to the other side of the store. He stood there, not looking at me anymore, but focusing on the wall or the items on display in that area. I was really confused by this situation, and it started to make me feel uneasy. The guy's behavior was starting to creep me out. Eventually, he went into the bathroom, which was located at the end of the store. He stayed there for about 10 minutes. Finally, another customer arrived at the gas station, filled up their vehicle, and came inside to pay. I felt really relieved when the normal customer arrived. It was such a relief from the strange encounter with the man earlier. I almost wanted to mention the weird guy to the customer, but I thought it wouldn't be professional, so I kept quiet. The customer left, and I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease knowing that the man was still in the bathroom. An entire hour passed, and we didn't have any more customers. The man didn't come out of the bathroom either. I felt like enough time had gone by, so I decided to go and check on the bathroom. It was a bathroom with 2 stalls, so I could just walk in to wash my hands or something, and it wouldn't seem weird. I reached the bathroom and opened the door. When I entered the bathroom, I noticed that it was completely dark inside. It was so dark that I couldn't see anything. I tried feeling around for the light switch, and when I finally found it, I saw that it was already turned on. This scared me a lot. At that moment, I thought about leaving right away, but I gathered some courage and decided to use the flashlight on my phone to see what was going on. As I turned on the flashlight, I looked into the first stall and saw that it was empty. Then my eyes fell upon the second stall. I could see the man's legs sticking out from beneath the stall door. I slowly directed my flashlight upwards and saw the man's face peering over the top of the stall, staring right at me with the creepiest smile I had ever seen. I was so frightened by his appearance that I accidentally dropped my phone. I quickly picked it up and without hesitation, ran towards the bathroom door as fast as I could. I got out there and the man did not come out and follow me. I went back to the counter and debated what I should do for a few minutes. I really did not want to go back in there, but I also didn't want the man scaring customers that went to the bathroom, and I felt that it was my responsibility to keep the place safe. As much as I didn't want to, I decided to go back and tell the man he would have to leave. I walked back to the bathroom and opened the door. I shouted to the man that he needed to leave, but there was no response. I can't say that I was surprised. I decided to just put an out of order sign on the door because of him and the light not working. Several hours passed, and I only had a few customers during that time. Surprisingly, the man never left the bathroom. Finally, at 4 a.m., my coworker Devin arrived, and we worked together for the last hour of my shift. Having Devin with me made me feel much safer, so I decided to share what had happened with him. We agreed to go into the bathroom together and find out why the man was still in there. We walked in, shining our flashlights around, but to our surprise, both stalls were empty. There was no sign of the man at all. I couldn't understand how he managed to leave without me noticing. Even now, thinking about it still gives me chills. After our shift ended, we shared the bizarre encounter with our manager and even reviewed the surveillance footage. However, to our surprise, there was no footage of the man entering or leaving the gas station or even being inside the bathroom. It was as if the whole encounter had been a creation of my imagination. To this day, the mystery remains unsolved, haunting my thoughts from time to time. If you have any theories or insights about this creepy incident, please share them in the comments. I worked as an overnight security guard in a healthcare facility. My job is pretty easy most of the time, as usually I just sit at a desk and watch over security cameras as well as taking care of things around the building. There are mostly just a few overnight nurses and doctors working, and we don't typically get many people coming into the building. One night, it was about 2 in the morning and I was sitting at my desk when I suddenly noticed some movements on one of the cameras. It was dark and I couldn't really see, but it looked like a person walking past. It was coming from a room down the hall, but nobody was supposed to be in that room at this time. I decided to go and check what was happening. When I reached the room, it looked empty, but I noticed that someone had covered the camera on the wall with tape. That room was connected to another room, so I went inside to take a look. That's when I saw a man wearing all black. He looked at me, and we locked eyes. He was about 15 feet away from me. We stared at each other for a moment, and I was just about to say something when he suddenly started charging towards me. I prepared myself to defend against him. However, when he was about 5 feet away from me, he suddenly stopped, turned around, and started running in the opposite direction. I yelled for him to stop, but he ignored me. Instead, he ran towards the window, jumped out, and quickly ran away. I tried my best to chase after him, but when I reached the window, he had vanished into thin air. It was like he had magically disappeared. It was later discovered that the man had actually broken into the building by forcefully entering through the window. I still can't wrap my head around why he would do such a thing, or what his plans were once he made it inside. The incident left me feeling bewildered and puzzled. I couldn't help but wonder what motivated him to break into a healthcare facility during the late hours of the night. Was he after something specific? Or was it just a random act of mischief? The whole situation was incredibly peculiar and unsettling. After the incident, I made sure to report the break-in to the authorities and informed my superiors about what had occurred. We took extra precautions to strengthen the security measures in the building to prevent any further unauthorized entries. That incident served as a stark reminder that even in a seemingly calm and quiet environment, unexpected events can occur.
I used to work at this hotel, and I found myself in a number of rather unusual situations, quite more than I would like to admit. One night when I was working the front desk, I noticed a man walking by me who caught my eye. He wasn't necessarily doing anything wrong, he just seemed to be acting suspicious to me. He walked past my desk probably about 5 times, before I finally said something. Excuse me, sir, do you need help with something? I asked the man. He then turned and looked at me with a look of disgust on his face. He quickly turned back away from me without saying a word and continued walking. I thought that was really strange, but I didn't call security just yet because I didn't have a legit reason to call them. The man looked like he was looking for something, or I don't even know what he was doing. Well, he was sketching me out, that's for sure. And then he finally walked outside, and I was hoping that would be the last of it. However, this was only just the beginning. I received a phone call about 5 minutes later on the hotel phone, so I picked it up. Hello, how can I help you? But the person on the other end didn't say a thing. The only thing I heard was heavy breathing. Hello, is anybody there? I asked one more time before eventually hanging up, because at that point I just thought it was a prank call. Anyways, the phone rang again only about a minute after I hung up the phone previously, and this time I answered it, probably sounding a little bit more irritated because I was annoyed at the prank call. We used to get prank calls all the time, and it would be quite annoying, so I was fed up. This time, though, they were screaming. On the other end of the phone, there was a lady, and she said she needed help and that she was outside in the parking lot and that she couldn't walk. She said she had been ran over by a car and that the person who hit her drove off. She told me that she was wearing a red dress and that I couldn't miss her when I walked outside. And then she described the man who did it as a very tall, middle-aged man who was bald and had a black coat on and blue jeans. The description that she gave me 100% matched up with the man who was acting really weird a few minutes before, who gave me that weird look when I asked him if he needed help with anything. Thought that was really strange. I also thought it was really weird how she called the hotel rather than the police, that she was begging for me to get out there and help her. And me, being the kinder person that I am, I went against my gut and I went outside looking for her and tried to help her. As soon as I stepped outside, I realized it was raining, so I didn't want to walk all the way out to the parking lot until I at least looked around the area and figured out a little bit of what was going on. When I looked around the parking lot, I didn't notice the woman at first glance, but when I finally found her, I knew it was her, and I knew for a fact something was wrong. I knew it was her because she was the only woman in the parking lot, and she was wearing a red dress. She wasn't crying in pain though, she was actually standing on her own 2 feet, and then I noticed that she was talking to someone. It wasn't until the man that she was talking to walked around the backside of the car and hid behind it that I realized it was the same man from earlier, the same exact man that she had described in the phone call. Then the woman took a few steps from the car and laid down in the middle of the parking lot, and she started to scream like she had been hurt or something. But then she looked at me. I think she realized I witnessed the whole thing, because when I ran back inside to call the police, they immediately took off. I didn't know exactly what was going on, but I didn't want any part of it. It looked like to me they were trying to stage the entire thing in an attempt to lure me out there. I still work at that hotel, and I haven't seen either of them since. The whole entire situation spooked me to my core, though it's something I think about quite often.